I suppose I have to go back to my childhood. Don't worry, I won't bore you too much. But back at school, certainly, I didn't achieve in my academics. I was very unsporty and I lacked confidence. And that's something that sort of blighted my life. I always felt that there was that ceiling that was just described. The only ceiling is in your mind. Well, in my mind, it was very much there. I never felt that I was going to achieve anything. And I think we all talk of tipping points, certain moments in your life when you make one single decision and it changes everything. And for me, that came in 1999. I had somehow managed to scrape through university and was working in London. And I opened up a newspaper one day, and there was an advert. Wanted 30 volunteers to be marooned on a desert island for a year. And I have to say, I just jumped at the chance. The opportunity to go and become a real-life Robinson Crusoe was just too great an opportunity to turn down. So I signed up. Admittedly, I later found out that they were thinking about an island in the Outer Hebrides of Scotland. I'd originally had images of a sandy white beach, perhaps in the Pacific Ocean with palm trees. But it didn't put me off, and I became a volunteer for the BBC's social experiment in the year 2000 called Castaway. And we were all marooned for a whole year on this island. We had to become completely self-sufficient. We reared our own livestock, we put in our own water piping, we created our own renewable energy source. And I've probably got a couple of photos here, hopefully, which we might have. I'll get onto that in a second. But I absolutely loved that whole year. And it actually, for me, it was where my confidence finally began to grow. I came back to London after that year, and I have to say it was one of the hardest experiences going from this island paradise. We were cut off from the outside world. We had no mobile phones, we had no computers, we had no newspapers, absolutely nothing. No friends, no visitors. There were just 30 of us for the whole year. And when I came back to London, it was a bit of a shock to the system. Suddenly, lights were too bright and noises were too noisy, smells were too smelly. It was overwhelming, to tell you the truth. All I wanted to do was to escape back to that island. I still wasn't really sure what I wanted to do with my life, and I was very lucky the BBC came along and asked me whether I'd like to start presenting a couple of shows. And there began a long career with the BBC doing animal and country shows. I absolutely loved it, and for about 5 years I immersed myself in natural history programs both here and overseas, but there was something still wrong. Something was always nagging me. I think in my industry there's a tendency to stereotype. For many years I was posh Ben, then I was reality show Ben, then I was daytime TV presenter Ben, and none of them really felt like they suited me. None of them really felt like they were the real me. And it wasn't until a rather drunken night in a pub that all changed forever. It was probably the second tipping point in my life. A friend suggested that perhaps I run the London Marathon. I could raise a great deal of money for charity, lose a bit of weight at the same time. And I don't know what came over me, probably the 5th pint of lager that was in there. But I poo-pooed the idea and said, I've got a much better idea. I'm going to race something called the Marathon des Sables, a 200-mile marathon across the Sahara Desert, which is run in 5 days, so it's consecutive marathons back to back. Bearing in mind I'd never even run half a marathon, this was the most unsporty person around. And I called up the organisers, I'm a man of my word, the next morning, and said, hello, I'd like a place, and they went, unfortunately, we have to put you on the waiting list. There's 1,000 people ahead of you. Secretly, I went, phew, because I'd applied and that was it. And I forgot about it for a few months. 2 months before the race itself, I got a call from out of the blue. Congratulations, 1,000 people have dropped out due to injury. You've got a place. So suddenly, I had just 2 months to get ready for this seemingly impossible race, the art of the impossible. I went to my local gym, I signed up, and I said I need to train for an event in a couple of weeks, and got a fitness instructor, and he went, okay, what, 5-kilometre fun run? And I shook my head, and he said, you're not going to try a half marathon in that time. When I eventually revealed what it was, he refused to train me in case I died, and he was held culpable. So I trained myself, and somehow, 8 weeks later, found myself with 700 elite endurance runners from across the world. And the only way to describe that week is the most painful, miserable experience of my life, but I got through it. I was on crutches for 2 weeks afterwards. I lost all the skin on my feet. But for the first time, I felt myself walking taller. I felt I'd grown in confidence. And I wanted another challenge. I wanted to surprise people once again. But this time I wanted to take it up a notch. So I went online, and I discovered that not only had people rowed across the Atlantic Ocean, but there was a race. People would actually race in little 20-foot rowing boats made of plywood and glue across the ocean. And before I could stop myself, I signed my name down with my bank details, a very hefty deposit, and signed up for this race. And it was only afterwards that I sat back and thought about small little details, like the fact that I'd never rowed before in my life. I didn't have a rowing partner, I knew nothing about the oceans, and I forgot about it until about a year before the race, and I was out at a party, and there across the room I spotted James Cracknell. I don't really follow sport very much, but I recognised him. He'd just won his second gold medal at the Sydney Olympics as part of the awesome foursome with Sir Stephen Redgrave. And my first thought was, there's a bloke that can row. So I'd never met before, and I bounded up and said, James, you don't have a clue who I am, but how would you like to row the ocean with me? Row the Atlantic Ocean with me? And he looked down at me and said, can you row? And I went, no, never rowed before in my life. And he told me where to go. But perseverance, it's another key word for this morning. I persevered, I got his details. And 2 weeks later, I managed to persuade him to meet up. And we talked about our very different personalities. James is a professional Olympic athlete. He's made a career out of winning gold, coming first, being the best at what he does. I suppose I have to admit, am just a grown-up Blue Peter presenter, really. I love to have a go at things. I'm stubborn and determined, and I'm enthusiastic, but winning's never been a priority. And we decided that this might make a really interesting experiment. Could these two very different personalities, if we came together and worked together, could we actually achieve the seemingly impossible? So we became, as the papers dubbed us, the strange duo, the unlikely couple. And for the best part of a year, we had time to become ocean yacht masters. We had to do sea survival courses. We had to learn how to put stitches into one another, how to fix broken bones. We had to learn how we could survive for anything up to 6 months at sea in a very, very small boat. The one thing I forgot to do was learn to row. In fact, in the 3 months leading up to the race, I found myself filming out in Namibia, out in the deserts, and had a rowing machine strapped to the roof of my vehicle. And every morning before we started filming, we'd start very early because we were filming the wildlife, I'd get up at about 3 in the morning, set my rowing machine up in the middle of the desert, and just row for 3 hours. And it was fantastic. As the sun rose, I'd just see an ocean of eyes. Children had run from miles to come and stare at this crazy, sweaty Englishman in the desert on a land boat that didn't go anywhere. About 10 days before the race, James and I flew out to the start line where we joined 30 other international crews. And we were hopelessly ill-prepared. Even though we put what we thought was a lot of effort in, it was nothing compared to teams that had spent 4 years training for this. James and I had never been rowing together. Our boat had never even been in the water. We still had all the instruction manuals on how to use the GPS and how to use the water desalinator and the solar panels. The safety officer involved in the race wasn't very happy, and she pretty much disqualified us before we'd even started. And I can tell you that was a pretty humiliating experience. She gave us an almost impossible list of things that we had to complete before we set off. Just to give you an idea of why she did this, we had a hand bilge pump. The boat obviously fills with water. We had an electric one supplied with we had a solar panel for limited energy. But in case that broke, we needed a hand pump. We've probably all used those. James hadn't, and she asked him whether he could demonstrate how to use it. So he got a bucket of water and proceeded to put the outlet pipe in the water and pump air into the bucket of water. And it was that moment when she flipped her lid. But somehow we got through that impossible list of things she wanted us to do. And the morning of the race came, and we were given the green light. Another small scenario that I think demonstrates just how ill-prepared we were. There was quite a lot of press interest in the odd couple taking part in this race, and we went down, got into the boat for the first time together. I sat in the seat, put my oars in, and I felt a tap on my shoulder from James, and he went, "Mate, you've put the oars in the wrong way round." And I really think that sums up our lack of preparation. That first week at sea was the most miserable week of my life. If I'd have had a pair of ruby red slippers that I could have clicked together and disappeared. I'd have done anything to get out of there. Imagine the scenario. We had decided for the first 6 hours we would row together, and from then on we'd break into 2 hours on, 2 hours off. 2 hours on, 2 hours off. 24 hours a day, 7 days a week for as many months as it took us. We would never, ever stop moving that boat. For the first 6 hours we'd row together because James wanted to be up at, in his terms, the pointy end of the race. He wanted to be up in the first 3 boats. After those 6 hours, I came off the oars. I counted 20 blisters on my hands that were already bleeding. I had boils on my bottom, my back ached, I was dehydrated, I was hungry, I was homesick for the first time since I went away to school. But above all, I was absolutely petrified of James Cracknell. I realised he was a complete stranger and a nutter, and I was stuck on this boat for all that time. So I squeezed into the little cabin space. We called it the coffin. It was a teeny little enclosed place. And there was our GPS, our sat-nav, effectively. We still didn't know how to use it. Now, anyone here who sails, you're going to hear from a great sailor a little bit later, Jeff, will know that when you're typing in on your GPS, you put in waypoints to maximize the use of the currents around the ocean, the weather patterns, the continents that you're going to be passing. We didn't know how to do that, so we just typed in destination Antigua. And when I climbed into this cabin, I looked at the distance to run, and it said 3,011 miles. It had gone up 11 miles from when we started this race. And then underneath it had speed, 0.5 miles an hour. And James, the Olympian, was on the oars, and I couldn't get my mind over this impossible hurdle. How on earth was I already didn't want to be here, and I had this impossible task ahead of me. And we just both went into the most almighty gloom, depression for a week. We didn't talk to each other. We did that typical bloke thing. We just kind of grunted, and that was it. And it was only, it took us about 7 days to get used to life at sea, eating from rehydrated meals, pooing in a bucket, and being out at sea in pretty stormy conditions. And the only time when the moment we realized that we were finally getting used to life at sea was when we finally built the courage to call our loved ones at home. I forgot to point out that none of our loved ones wanted us to do this race in the first place. My mother was completely against it. She couldn't understand why I would want to do this. If I have one admission, I'm probably rather guilty of that. It's one thing I regret, especially with what happened a little bit later on. But we had a satellite phone, we could call home, and we felt confident that we wouldn't just cry on the other end of the phone saying how much we didn't want to be there. We didn't think that would go down very well. And of course, I spoke to my then girlfriend and my mother. James's first question to his wife was, how are we doing in the race? We had no visual on the other boats. From 30 minutes into this race, you didn't see another boat. But we had a little tracking beacon. And James's wife said, you're in 7th place. And James just nosedived. He fell into this depression once again. He couldn't believe it, 7th place. And he knocked on the little cabin door where I was trying to get some sleep. And he said, do you want to know how we're doing in the race? And I went, okay. And he said, we're in 7th. And I practically gave an Oscar acceptance speech. I was so excited. 7th! James, I never dreamed we would do so well. And that's when our very different personalities and, more importantly, our very different aspirations came to the fore. James was in this race to compete, and I was in this race to complete it. Very similar words, but they have very, very different objectives. And I tell you, we had some huge rows over the next 7 days. But all that paled into insignificance when about 5 weeks into the race, hadn't seen another boat for that whole time. We'd had massive storms, and I was on the oars one morning, and I noticed a wave getting bigger and bigger and bigger behind the boat. And then James was in the cabin space. And the next thing I felt was the boat collapsing on top of me. I felt a rush of cold water. And next thing I knew, I was tumbling through the water. The oars were ripped from my hands. And to be honest, I thought I'd met my maker. I really thought that was it. We'd been pitch-poled. The boat had been capsized front over end. Somehow I made it to the water, and there was our upturned boat about 200 meters away from us. We'd become very complacent by this stage. We'd been at sea for 5 weeks. What could possibly go wrong? We'd given up wearing life jackets. We'd given up wearing safety harnesses. Nothing could touch us. We were invincible, we thought. And here I was in the water, an upturned boat, and no sign of James. And the thought that went through my mind was my mother saying, "What have you done?" Somehow I got back to the boat. It was supposed to be self-righting, but we hadn't we hadn't closed the door properly, and I knew that the cabin with James had filled with water. Somehow I was able to right it. James came out. He was alive. He was battered and bruised, but he was alive. We were both alive. And I was prepared. I was waiting to pull what's called our EPIRB, our emergency beacon. We all had one fitted to our boat, but in the middle of the ocean, there's no quick way of rescue. Planes can't reach you, helicopters can't reach you. The only form of rescue is if there's a ship in the area that can be diverted and come to you. And James looked at me as I was ready to pull this, and he said, "Right, you've got 30 minutes to get yourself dried off and back on the oars before we lose a race position." I said, "Hello? We've just nearly died and you're still worried about this race?" But he was quite right. We'd lost just about everything. We'd lost our satellite phones, all our electrics. We had no more water desalinator that converts salt water into fresh water. We'd lost something called a sea anchor, a giant parachute that stops you being blown backwards when the wind is too strong on the front of the boat. But we still had our oars. We still had some emergency water in the ballast of the boat underneath. And we still had some food. And James was quite right. Had we stayed there, rescue could have taken up to a week. We later found out that 50% of the fleet of the other boats in the race had also capsized that night, and all of them had disintegrated on impact. Luckily, no one died, but they were all in their life rafts, and most took about a week to be rescued. So we carried on, and it was a complete watershed in the whole journey. Suddenly, two strangers became friends. We had this shared experience. Suddenly, we had exactly the same objectives. We wanted to get off that ocean as quickly as possible. We doubled our speeds that we were doing each day. We chatted. It became a more enjoyable experience. And for me, it really changed the whole dynamic of not only that race, but our friendship together. And somehow, 49 days later, we pulled our battered little boat into English Harbour in Antigua, the first two-man boat by 3 days. And somehow we had defied the critics. We had shown that impossible is nothing, that actually if you put your mind to it, you can achieve absolutely anything. And I think to date, it still remains my proudest achievement, partly because everyone thought it was going to be impossible. A lot of people ask how on earth we carried on through that first week when we wanted to give up. Well, I think it was the fear of failure, the fear of the humiliation of turning back. Everyone expected us to hit a brick wall. Everyone expected us to turn back, and we wanted to prove that actually, if you put your mind and your body to it, you can achieve absolutely anything you want. And I hope that you'll take that away from today, because what Jeremy and his gang and all of you are trying to do might seem like the impossible, but nothing is impossible. And I'm sure you're going to hear some other inspiring tales today. And I hope that those words that certainly jumped out at me this morning of optimism and happiness and positivity will leave with you at the end of today.